Everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing some Fall-O-Ween DIYs. These are going to be some perfect ideas to quickly add in some Halloween aspects to your fall decor. And for this first project, we're going to be doing some witch silhouettes. I made these silhouettes with some colorful little witch hats in Canva. I'll put them on my blog for you to download if you're interested. But I'm also going to be using some small frames that I got from the thrift store. And once I printed these out, I just used cardstock to print them on and then use the little inserts inside of the frames to trace those out and cut them down for the frames. Now I wanted mine to all hang together, so I'm going to be using some black velvet ribbon to hang all three of these on. For the first piece, I just made a little bow at the top of the top frame, and then I'm going to add another piece of this velvet ribbon and make it long enough so that I can hold all three of these frames on here. Once I kind of figure out exactly the placement of where I want them on the frames, then I just flip them over and tie a little knot. This way each frame is secure and it won't slide down the velvet ribbon. Then you can just cut off any excess. I'm going to be using this large cement pumpkin that I've had for quite a few years now. As you can see by looking at the bottom of it, it was gray when I first bought it, and throughout the years I just kind of change it up whenever I want to go with my decor. As you can see from last year, this was painted a burnt orange and white color, but this year I figured I would actually just use this more in my Halloween decor. So I started out by painting that stem with a small brush and some of my apple barrel acrylic paint in the color burnt umber. And for the first coat, I wasn't too concerned about getting the paint on the pumpkin because as you can see here, I am going to go in and paint this entire thing white. So I did 2 coats over the entire thing, and then of course anywhere that I had gotten paint on the stem or vice versa, then I just touched it up with a small paintbrush. After it dried completely, then I'm going to go in with some of these alphabet stamps that I got from Amazon and some of my archival ink. And I just kind of started stamping Halloween themed words all around this pumpkin. As you can see, I did try to start out using my acrylic block, but since the shape was a little bit lumpy on here, it was too difficult. So I just went in with each individual letter and just kept stamping my way around this pumpkin to do the first line. And then once I have that first line done, then I'm just going to continue down to the next line and continue stamping Halloween words all the way around this pumpkin. And I'm not sure if you can tell really in the video, but some of the words I did a little darker with the ink and then some just a little lighter. And this doesn't have to be perfect. Again, it's for Halloween. So I just continued all the way down my pumpkin. Then to finish the pumpkin off, I am going in with some of my European Gold Rub and Buff, going over that stem, and then also I ended up using it in between the little crevices on the pumpkin just to age this up a little bit and not make it so new and white. For this project, I'm going to be using these little wood trivets that I found at the thrift store. As you can see, they are already a little dented up and banged up, but they'll definitely work great for a Halloween project since they are already kind of old and grungy. I am going to remove those little feet on the bottom of these so that I can make these into hanging pictures. I'm going to be covering these a little later on with some paintings from my Etsy shop, but I did want to cover the images on the little ceramic plates. I ended up doing 2 coats of this Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster, but I do wish I would have done a darker color instead. And you'll see what I mean by that in just a little bit, but now I am going in and I'm just working with these aged frames and aging them even more. I'm using a little bit of some tan colored wax that I made, just using some clear wax and mixing a few drops of tan paint into that clear wax. So the goal is to make these look as old and dingy as possible. I just work this wax over both of these frames, just using a paper towel and just kind of blending it on top of there. I let both of these completely dry with that first layer of wax, and then I'm going to go in with some black wax that I made. Again, this time I just mixed some antiquing wax with a few drops of black acrylic paint to make this wax. And for this one, I'm just applying it with a dry rag. And yes, I did get some on the white paint, but again, I'm not concerned about that because like I said, I could have painted these dark anyway. Like I said at the beginning, I want to add some images from my Etsy shop. So I have this rice paper that I got from Amazon. I'll have it listed in my Amazon storefront, but I chose these 2 images and printed these on that rice paper on the textured side. And you don't need a special printer or anything. I just used my inkjet printer to print these. Now, I wasn't exactly sure if the ink would run on these or not, so I decided to do the iron-on method with these. I applied a nice layer of Mod Podge over the top of both of these ceramic pieces, and then I let them completely dry. Then I'm going to line my image up exactly where I want it on this piece, and I'm going to put a piece of parchment paper over top of it and just use my little mini iron to go over this for about a minute. I'll have this mini iron linked in my Amazon storefront, but I do have this on a 300 degrees setting, and I'm making sure that I'm getting all of the edges as well. Then I did the exact same thing for my other one. And when you're doing this, just make sure that you are continuously moving the iron so it doesn't burn your image. Now for the first one, to remove the excess, I did start out by trying to use some sandpaper, but it just wasn't working the way I had hoped. This one especially has a little lip on this ceramic piece, so it just wasn't getting it how I wanted it. Then I tried a little box cutter, just cutting away the paper, and again, it still just had some ragged edges that I didn't want. And it was kind of ripping the paper on the sides instead of cutting so that you could see that white paint under here. I do go back in just a little bit and kind of fix the edges of this one, but I did want to go around it and do a little layer of Mod Podge all over those edges. Now for the round one, I found my X-Acto knife and was able to just cut this all the way around the edges. And to go back in and fix those edges, I am just using some of that black wax and a really small paintbrush and just going inside all those little crevices around the edges so you can't see the paint underneath. For this project, I'm going to be making some ghost taper candles using this Amazon candle mold that I have, and then also using some Dollar Tree candles. I have these taper candles and I'm going to cut off most of the end of this taper candle, but you'll want to leave a little bit sticking out of the mold, and that's how we're going to turn these into taper candles. Now I'm going to be using this Dollar Tree candle for my wax, but you can also just use some wax melts or whatever you have. So I just set that in a pot of boiling water, and while I'm waiting for the wax to melt, I'm going to secure the mold inside of a glass candle holder, and this is just so I can make sure that this doesn't fall over once I am pouring the wax down in there. So just put it in something and make sure it's nice and secure. You can also add some scent to your wax if you want to. I'm actually using this pumpkin spice oil from Amazon. So once the wax was melted, I just added a little bit into there and mixed it with a craft stick before pouring this down into my candle mold. Just be sure your taper candle stays in the center. Now I ended up using 2 of those white candles from Dollar Tree to make these, and with both of those I ended up having some leftover wax, so I went ahead and just made some Halloween wax cubes. So if you have any of these little Halloween silicone molds, then you can do the same with your leftover wax. Now once the candles hardened, then I was able to just remove them pretty easily from those molds, and then I just decided to add some little eyes with acrylic paint. Year I did this little thrift store ghost painting, and this year I actually found a painting with a similar frame, and this time it had a little cottage in it. So I thought I could turn this one into a witch's cottage. So to do this, I'm just going to be using some acrylic paints in some autumn colors and then some small paint brushes. When doing these thrift store paintings and changing them up, you always want to start with things that are in the background. So for this one, I am going to start with the house. I'm going to turn this into a witch's cottage, and I am doing the roof of this by mixing a little bit of black and white and doing a really dark gray. You'll notice there are some trees in the background, but I'm not going to worry about those just yet, because once I start doing those, then I can cover the roof a little bit with the leaves. Now, as for the house itself, I'm kind of going with a Salem vibe, and I just mixed a little more white into that black paint to do a lighter but still dark gray. And you will notice there are flowers coming up onto the house, so I'm kind of just painting around those, and I am painting over some of them, but I'm leaving some so that I know where to come back and put those autumn colors. As for the door arches and windows, I am going to go in with a dark brown color and just use a little liner brush to go over the window frames and that arch and the porch. I used the same brown color on the chimneys for now. Then it was time to move on to all the foliage, and I am basically just taking a kind of burnt orange color and mixing it with a little bit of black, a little bit of gray here and there, or just using the burnt orange color by itself and making lots of highlights and shadows in these trees and bushes. And I'm just using a fluffy round brush and just dabbing this paint all over the picture. And I'm going to keep going with those colors, the burnt orange, the gray mixed in a little bit, and the black mixed in here and there. And I'm going to go over all of the flowers and everything, even up the house. And by now the house is completely dry, so I can go back in and do a few details. One thing, I wanted this to look like the house in Salem, which has the shaker style wood on it. So I am just taking a liner brush and some black paint and very lightly making some lines across there. And then I did the same thing with the roof. Then going back to the chimneys, I used some dark red paint paint and that liner brush again with the black paint to make that look like bricks. Then I'm going to do the walkway by mixing a little bit of gray paint, some tan paint, some brown paint, and just make those look like dark stone. And once they were dry, I mixed up a lighter tan color and just went over all of those. And since this is acrylic paint, you could kind of see the darker ones under there. And I used my liner brush with some brown paint and really defined all those stones. Then it was time to add a witch and a little black cat, so I'm just using my pencil and sketching those out. Then I'm going to use my little liner brush again and trace around all of my pencil marks and then fill those in with some black paint. I'm going to have the cat and the witch facing the cottage just to make it easier for myself. I don't have to draw faces or anything, so I just had to draw the back of her head and the backside of her dress. I added some bats in the sky and a couple spider webs on the house, and also to finish it off, I just did some more foliage around the bottom of her dress. And of course, the final things I had to add was a jack-o'-lantern on the porch and then adding some smoke to the chimney. For this project, I'm going to be using these silicone molds of ghosts that I got from Amazon. These are originally for candles, but I'm going to be using some plaster of Paris in these. I ended up making 5 of these, so it took about 5 cups of the plaster of Paris to do all of them. And as I've said in a previous video, I do buy my plaster of Paris in a huge tub from Amazon for around $9. And for this project, I just mixed it as it says on the tub, and then I poured it into these molds. Now, one thing I want to mention is before I pour the plaster into any molds, I do wet them with cold water, and this is going to help you be able to remove it a lot easier. Now, each of these takes about 24 hours to completely cure and dry. So once I've filled them up, I do give them a little shake and a little bounce to get any air bubbles out, and then I will just set these aside and let them dry. And here they are the next day, all dry. All I had to do was kind of flip that mold inside out to get these little ghosts out of there. Now, these molds do come with 2 different kinds of ghosts, so this one right here with the little arms was just a little more difficult to get out, but that's just because I had to get the mold over his arm first and then pull it over his head. Now, I gave all 5 of my little ghosts a light sanding just to get off any of the little pieces at the bottom of them, and then I'm going to go over them with 2 coats of my white chalk paint. Then to finish these off, I decided to paint them with some black paint and my little liner brush and just do some botanicals on these ghosts. If you wanted to, you could absolutely use some rub-on transfers or even some stamps just to make these ghosts a little bit different. Once I finished hand painting them, then I sealed all of them with 1 coat of Mod Podge. I found this tabletop book at the thrift store and thought this would make a really cute little spell book that you could sit on a table or a shelf. The first thing I did was measure the book pages on that so that I could make these little graphics in Canva, and I just used their free graphics to type out a witch's brew and then this little vintage image of a witch with a cauldron. I used a little bit of white acrylic paint and did 2 coats over the wording that was on the book. Then I used my watercolor pen. This one's from Dollar Tree, and just went around the edges so that I could tear it a little bit. I did use rice paper to print on, so I am going to Mod Podge these right to the book pages. I love using rice paper. It just works really well for Mod Podging. Once I had those both down, then I'm going to take a small paintbrush, and there was a little dip where the cover shows on the front of this, so I am going to paint that with a little bit of black acrylic paint. And then to age this up and make it look vintage, I did go over it lightly with some antiquing wax and then just added some darker spots. And finally, I added a very thin little black velvet ribbon. Project, I'm using this beautiful angel that I picked up at the thrift store. The first thing I did was mix a little bit of baking soda with some chalk paint in the color Plaster. I want to make her look more like a stone. And I did mix this kind of thick, so I'm just using a pretty fluffy chippy brush and dabbing this all over her. Once she was dry, I wanted to add a few spooky elements to her to kind of make her resemble a tombstone heading. So I am using this skull mold that I've used before on a vase, and I ended up making about 4 of these skulls so that I could add them to her. She already had her hand posed in a way that looked like it could be holding something, so I added a skull there, and then I added a few more over to the other side of her where her arm was outstretched. So this is what she looked like once I had all of those glued down. I also wanted to add a tombstone to the front of her, so I rolled out some more of my air dry clay, and I just cut this down in the shape of a tombstone. And I really just wanted this to be a generic tombstone, so I used some of my alphabet stamps and just put rest in peace on the front of it. And of course, if you wanted to, you could personalize this tombstone to your favorite Halloween character. Once I had the letters pressed on there, then I just went around with a little bit of water on my finger and smoothed everything out. To make it look more spooky and weathered and old, I used a little needle tool and just added a few cracks to the front of it. Then I just used some gel super glue to glue this to the front of the angel. As you can see at the bottom here, she kind of has some little stone rocks at her feet. So I wanted to blend this tombstone in, and I did that by just using a little bit of air dry clay and making some new rocks. And again, I just used some gel super glue to attach those and kind of blend it in. I made just as many as it took to make it look like this tombstone had been here all along. I also used my finger and some more water to smooth out any of the separation between these rocks and blend them together. Then I set it aside and let it dry overnight. Like I said, I wanted this to look like a stone, so the next day I mixed that Waverly plaster with a tan color to get this creamy beige color for my angel. Now I realized most tombstones are a gray cement color, but I just wanted this to look more like a limestone. So once I had this completely covered in this color, then I mixed that same color with a little bit of baking soda, and I went over all of those new clay pieces that I made so that they would blend in with the angel. Just making sure that everything had the same texture. Then to finish her off, I used a large chippy brush and some European gold rub and buff and just went over this entire thing. For this project, I found this cute little, I think it's a sugar canister for Christmas from the thrift store. It was already missing the top, but I thought it looked a lot like a witch's cauldron. So I'm actually going to turn this into a matchstick holder. The first thing I'm going to do to turn this into a witch's cauldron is take out some of my air dry clay, and I am going to roll out very small skinny pieces, and those are going to be the handles for the cauldron. Then I'm going to take another small piece and cut it into strips and fold those strips over the little handles so it just looks like little knobs that are holding the handles on the side of the cauldron. Then I'm just going to use some gel super glue to attach those to each side of the cauldron. At this point, you can totally leave it like this. It's cute just like this, but I wanted to add some little bats to the front of my cauldron. So I'm using this little bat mold from Amazon and some more of my air dry clay, and I just made 2 of them to add to the front of the cauldron. Then I'll set this aside and let the air dry clay harden overnight before giving this 2 coats of some black chalk paint. And once that chalk paint was completely dry, then I sealed it with some Aleene's acrylic sealer. Project, we're going to be making an apothecary sign. I found this wood piece at my local thrift store, and it was already a Halloween sign, but I just removed everything off of it and gave it a light sanding. To turn this into an apothecary sign, I made this in Canva and printed it off on a piece of rice paper. And I do have this image available for free download on my blog. I used my watercolor pen from Dollar Tree and went all around this image. Then I'm going to tear off all of these little edges and just make them jagged and not perfect. And I set that aside to use for later, but first I wanted to paint this sign. I'm using some Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster, and I'm going to do 2 coats over this. For my graphic, I'm going to be doing the iron-on method, so I needed to do 1 little coat of some Mod Podge over this and let that completely dry. Once it was dry, I just centered my graphic and then put a piece of parchment paper over top of it, used my little iron, and ironed over this for about a minute or 2 to fill in the empty space around the graphic and also cover up the edges of the paper. I'm using some spackling and this spiderweb stencil that I got from Amazon, and I'm going to go around and do a raised texture all around this, just letting it touch the edge of the paper. When I had finished, I set that aside and let the spackling completely dry and harden before painting it with another coat of that Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. And to finish it off, I'm going to go over this with some European Gold Rub and Buff with a big fluffy brush, and I'm even going to go over the actual graphic. This old wood plaque at the thrift store, and it did have a paper image on it. I just scraped that off and then cleaned this up and gave it a light sanding. And then I'm just going to leave this exactly as it is. I liked the color, I liked the aging on it, but then I wanted to add a haunted house stencil on top of here. This is actually one of those screen stencils, but I have no idea where I actually got this, but I did find one almost exactly like it on Amazon that I'll have linked in my storefront. Like I said, this is one of those stencils that is like a screen stencil that you're supposed to use with the paste, but I am just going to use this with some black acrylic paint. This one is also self-adhesive, so I just kind of made it off center a little bit. I wanted it hanging over more to one side. Then I'm just going to use a sponge brush, load it up with some acrylic paint, and then dab off a lot of the excess and go over this twice. Once it had fully dried, I went over it with some fine grit sandpaper just to make this blend in more with that old wood piece, make this look old and vintage. Then I cleaned it up and sealed it with some Aleene's acrylic sealer.